Thank you all for joining. The topic of digital health technologies and their integration into clinical trial design is a topic of a great interest. And more importantly, it's a topic that's had great impact on patient care for the past few years. As you will learn from this discussion, it's positioned to have even a greater impact for the years to come. And so to see you all in person and joining virtually, it really means a lot. I do hope you find value in this discussion. And so thank you for being here. With that, I would like to officially welcome you to King's College. Special thanks to Camiar and King's eLab for giving us the opportunity to have this, to shed light on such an important topic. And thank you, the panelists, for being here. You're all key opinion leaders and in your perspective fields within the space. So we're really happy that you're here with us. And with that, if I may take a minute to introduce our panel. Joining me to my left, we have Luis Garcia-Gancedo, Senior Director and Head of Digital Health Strategy for Oncology at Evinova. Within his work, Luis leads efforts to make oncology trials more efficient, effective, and patient-centric. We're also joined by Maz Khan, Vice President of Therapeutic Area and Digital Outcome Strategy at Medable. Maz leads different therapeutic area groups and drives digital sensor integration in clinical trials. It is worth mentioning that both Maz and Luis are graduates and alumni of the Judge Business School Executive MBA program here at Cambridge. And lastly, but definitely not least, joining us virtually from all the way from Toronto, my hometown, Dr. O'Neill Bhattacharya. O'Neill is the Freegan Blau Chair in Family Medicine Research at Women's College Hospital in Toronto and Director of the Institute of Health System Solutions and Virtual Care. O'Neill is a practicing family physician and a professor at the University of Toronto. His research focuses on evaluating digital health tools to guide healthcare policy and decision-making. Please join me in welcoming the panel. Recognizing that tonight we might have a bit of a diverse audience with different diverse backgrounds, and not everyone may have the background, the healthcare background. I thought it would be helpful to present a couple of slides to kind of set set the tune for the discussion. And so hopefully this will help you follow along with the discussion, but more importantly, hopefully this will help you form some questions as you listen to the discussion, because there will be a question and answer period at the end, and there may or may not be prizes for the best questions asked. So I'll keep that in mind. And so with that, we'll talk about, we'll talk about, the integration of digital health technology into clinical trials really changed the way we see, we view and we conduct clinical trials. It really helped us make them more patient-centric. From a patient perspective, and patients is arguably the most important stakeholder group within the clinical trial value chain. It's provided more convenience, and it's reduced the burden for patients who are enrolled in these clinical trials, and it made us provide patients more patient-centric approach or experience. But these are just a couple of benefits that are very kind of high level. Reality is there are many benefits from patient perspective. And as you could imagine, a complex area like this one, there are actually many stakeholders. They'll go beyond patients. There's the regulatory landscape. There's the physicians or the clinical trial team that's helping run the trial. There are the pharma or the sponsors of the trial. There's the technology firms, the healthcare system. So you can see the point that I'm trying to make is it's a complex kind of paradigm. And also, digital health technologies in these clinical trials have proved that they provide tangible benefits to all stakeholders that I mentioned and beyond. And I should emphasize that the ones that you see listed here are honestly just scratching the surface. There are many more. And obviously, I'm not going to go through them for the interest of time. But the point that I'm trying to make is the implementation of digital health technology has truly brought serious benefits to patients and all those involved in running clinical trials. But with all good things in life, there's also nothing good comes easy. You know, there's a lot of challenges as well, and at the same, you know, there are perceived challenges that you see from every stakeholder group here. So to bring digital health technology and implement them and expand them within the clinical trial paradigm, it's not an easy task. You have to really understand the nuances and the perceived benefits and challenges from each stakeholder group. And as I end this introduction, I will say the best way I could maybe explain this is by saying successfully and effectively bringing digital health technologies to clinical trials really feels like solving a very complex Rubik's Cube. With every move in a Rubik's Cube could represent a strategy, a tactic, or a collaboration with a different stakeholder. And as pharma, as technology firms, our job is to solve the Rubik's Cube with the least amount of moves possible, so we could actually bring something effective and efficient and successful, and also at the same time something that's commercial, has provide a commercial opportunity and a return on investment from a business perspective. So with all that in mind, I hope that gives you an idea of the complexity, but also the benefits of digital health technologies. With that, I'd like to maybe jump into the first theme of the talk, which is focusing on the innovation versus practical implementation of digital health technologies. And with that, I'll maybe direct the first question to you, Louis. One of the main challenges, perceived challenges by patients and maybe also by healthcare providers, even clinical sites, is the practicality and user friendliness of these digital health technologies and how integratable they are into the system. So just focusing on that, and looking, your job at Evinova is to bring innovative solutions to maximize the value of these digital health technologies. So you're faced with this paradigm of the balance between making sure that it's realistic and implementable, but at the same time innovative. How do you deal with that balance?
Yeah, thanks, Amin. So before I answer your question, let me start by sharing a thought that I think is going to be relevant for the discussion today, which is we should only be using digital solutions when they aim to address a particular challenge or a problem, something that is meaningful to any of the stakeholders, either the patients, the clinicians, clinical investigators, or any other stakeholder group. So with that, I mean to say that we shouldn't be using digital solutions because we can. We need to use digital solutions because we should, because they help us address a very meaningful challenge. So with that in mind, when thinking about balancing innovation with patient friendliness and reliability, in reality, I don't think all those things are opposed. I think if we follow the right process when developing digital solutions, we can achieve solutions which are innovative, which are patient friendly and are reliable. I think in the time that we have today, I can say the process very simplistically could have 2 or 3 different steps. First of all, as I said, is identifying very clearly what is the challenge that we want to address, or the challenge that the digital solutions can contribute to help us, a challenge or an opportunity, of course, because no matter how user-friendly the solutions are, if they are not meaning to address a meaningful challenge, then nobody's going to be happy using those solutions. So first of all, very clearly define the problem statement, the impact, and define what is the ideal outcome state that we want to go into. Then the second step is when designing our digital solutions, of course, we need to engage with the users. We need to consider the input from the patients, from investigators, from clinicians, from caregivers, from anyone that is going to be the user of the solution in designing those solutions. And this is not a one-off effort, so it's not a one interview with a group of patients, but it's a continuous effort throughout the development process of the solution. Thinking about reliability, of course, there are ways of assessing the reliability. I'll say in addition to reliability, we need to be looking into usability and feasibility. And most importantly, we need to be looking into clinical utility. And my third step is, well, in reality, it's always very difficult, if not impossible, for anyone to develop a digital solution that is ideal and is perfect on the day one, right? So we need to continuously assess the value and then refine, we redeploy over time. If I'm to share a very, very quick example, I'll say, as you said in my introduction, I do work in oncology clinical trials. One of the key challenges that we have in oncology clinical trials relate to side effects, toxicities, adverse events from the therapeutic medicines that we develop. And there is a huge, huge opportunity for digital solutions to contribute to solve that challenge by educating patients, by helping them identify early specific symptoms, helping them cope with symptoms, and helping the clinicians looking after the patients more effectively. So what we did is we developed a sort of a range of remote patient monitoring solutions following this process of identifying very clearly what is the challenge, how do we want to resolve it, running panels with patients, with caregivers, with investigators, and with many stakeholders, operations and regulatory and many others. And then again, testing in small groups and optimizing before scaling up. So in summary, I do think innovation, patient centricity, and reliability can be achieved if we develop our solutions following the right process.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Louis. With that, I'll maybe pass it on to O'Neill. O'Neill, your role is a bit unique in the sense that you are actually, maybe the end user of the digital health technologies that are being implemented. You do have a patient-facing role. So from your experience, how can you share some of the practical challenges that you faced that you think could be improved, I guess?
Sure. Thanks. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Perfect. So I'm going to go a little bit downstream from Louis. I am a family doctor, and thank you all for the invitation to speak today. But I'm going to bring the perspective of an evaluator. And so typically the Ministry of Health, the funder is asking me, is this digital tool any good? Should we renewal, scale, or spread this thing? So when I think about, the challenges of implementation and whether the value of any digital tool, I often start from the jobs to be done. So I don't know if they still teach Clayton Christensen in management schools, but there's this idea that for any individual, there are jobs to be done. There are functions that you are looking for. And I think that's pretty core to any digital tool. And Louis touched on that. So that's one element. And then the second is workflow and usability. So I'm going to take the perspective of physicians, because that's the group I work with the most closely. On the jobs to be done, the core question is this helping doctors do something they want to do? So in one example, recently we evaluated AI scribes. So these are ambient scribes. They listen to conversations between providers and patients, and they create clinical notes that summarize the conversation. So when we did the study, we tested it in a lab environment. We found, compared 6 tools head to head. They performed variably, but generally acceptably. And then we rolled it out to 150 doctors in the community. 1,000 people signed up for the study, and we had to choose 150. The demand was remarkable. And in a 3-month study, we demonstrated a 3-hour reduction in after-hours administrative workload. And with doctors being very happy about the output. So first off, doctors feel like they need to write, they need to write clinical notes. They hate spending hours. They estimated, we estimate that they spend about 19 hours a week on administrative tasks, most of which they find extremely annoying. So a tool that reduces administrative burden after hours, that's like from 5 p.m., between 5 p.m., the end of the clinic, and the start of dinner with your kids, shaving that time off was hugely beneficial. So that's an example of something they love, and they either pay out of pocket or are lobbying, different payers to try and pay for that. So that's one example. Remote monitoring, Louis touched on that. So we've done a couple of trials in the area of remote monitoring. And when we approached family doctors, we did one study on COPD, they said, remote monitoring, that's not our job. We're not staffed for it. We can't bill for it. That's just not something we do. So in a trial that we were going to work with respirology, respiratory therapy, and family medicine, we had to cut out family medicine because they didn't think it was their job. And that's sort of an ongoing issue. Remote monitoring, services often are standalone because most doctors don't think it's their job to remote, monitor their patients 24/7 unless it's part of a dedicated program. A related issue was with care coordination. So there are tools for care coordination. We did a study for frail elderly in rural areas, and they had care coordinators who had a great platform to communicate with patients to create sophisticated care plans. Family docs never signed on. They didn't sign up for the study. They never used the tool. We couldn't even get a hold of them to engage because they just didn't feel like care coordination is their job. Now we're doing another study on care coordination, and we're working with a regional health authority, I guess maybe a commissioning group would be the UK equivalent, and they're building a tool that nobody wants. And so now we have to try and design something to make it easy enough that they might engage. That's the first issue, is the jobs to be done. Are you helping people do something they want to do? And it's not like these things aren't useful. Doctors are busy. They just don't think it's their core job. On the workflow side, we've done a lot of work on clinical decision support systems. We did a study at the provincial level, so centrally designed and implemented clinical decision support systems to improve quality of care. We did a thing in congestive heart failure that essentially was an update to an acute care, an order set in the hospital setting. It worked great, increased prescription of a range of so class C and D drugs in congestive heart failure by 10-15%. So very significant effect size, very easy. We did another one on anxiety and depression, which involved systematic measurement using GAD-7 and PHQ-9. These are like standard symptom scores in psychiatric wards. So psychiatrists didn't actually think it was useful, and many of them don't believe in measurement-based care, though it is widely used in the pharmaceutical industry for drug trials and others. So there's that, and then there was no workflow. So the organizations that adopted it had usually one nurse or one social worker doing all the measurements, but psychiatrists didn't use it much. We did a similar thing in primary care, very low uptake, lots of issues with usability. And so, it's one of these things where I think in this instance, clinical decision support is going to get better with AI tools that are more intuitive, and it will start to become easier to roll out. But just to give an example, many of these things do not work at scale. And often it's an issue with the jobs to be done or issues with usability. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Anil. Maz, I'll turn it to you. So Anil just gave us a few examples, some that were very successful and brought a lot of value, others not so much. For you, somebody who works for a technology firm, how do you balance the innovation versus practicality?
Yeah, it's a great question, and there's very little to add to what Luis and Anil have said. I think it goes back to what Luis was saying, was really understanding what the problem statement is. What is it that you're solving for? Making sure that you understand what your stakeholders need. So at Medable, for example, and Luis mentioned this about the panels, but we have a patient network council, and so as the product's getting developed, the features are getting developed, we're able to speak to patients who are going to use the product and get feedback from them. Similarly with site users. What we don't want to do is have technology add a burden because often from a perspective that we're thinking about things, we may think we're making things easier, but actually suddenly they've got another device or additional reminders on top of everything else that's pinging when they're in a stressful time, they're in a drug trial. So understanding how we can make sure that we have that user voice throughout the development process. And then I think the other thing is also not losing sight of why we're doing it, which is making sure that we're answering the scientific questions that are being asked. And then the reason for, so, Luis gave examples of remote patient monitoring, which is kind of more real time, allowing for, timely interventions, but you've got kind of broader uses of other digital measures that can not only provide a more robust clinical picture, but in some cases act as digital biomarkers that could be surrogates for existing biomarkers. And so you're able to reduce the sample size, you're able to expedite how you get to your endpoints. So again, it's about understanding what those operational questions are, but not losing sight of the fact that you've still got scientific questions to be answering.
Awesome, amazing. So thank you all for your answers. And for the interest of time, I would like to move on to the next theme, which focuses on improving the, diversity, accessibility, and equity in clinical trials. With President Trump's recent executive order to disseminate DEI policies, the Federal Drug Administration, FDA, removed its draft guidance on diversity in clinical trials, which historically has been a big issue in clinical trials. It's always, there's certain population groups, races have always been non-represented, poorly represented in clinical trials, which led to us having really poor understanding of how drugs are the efficacy of drugs and side effects and these groups. So very important area. So what I'm hoping from this part of the discussion is to understand, how can DHTs or digital health technologies be leveraged to mitigate potential setbacks caused by this policy change. And so with that, I'll turn it to O'Neill. From your perspective, how can we work on establishing ecosystems that leverage DHTs to improve healthcare accessibility and promote diversity?
Thanks, Amin. So I'll start with the ecosystem question, and then I'll move into the diversity issue. So a lot of the history of digital health was creating point solutions to point problems. A couple of years ago, we did a paper on in Nature Digital Medicine, looking at sort of an approach, a heuristic, tool, team, and a routine. So what is the tool you're going to build? How does it fit with a team that has an established routine, and how does it fit into that? So I think that's been useful initially, but now, I think we're trying to shift more to an ecosystem vision. And here it's trying to consider multiple tools and function at once. Many, digital health interventions have been found to be ineffective, but in retrospect, I think they were insufficient rather than ineffective. So as an example, we've done a series of trials of secure messaging between patients and providers. And up to now in Ontario, we have billing codes for secure messaging. So doctors can now be paid to have messages between patients and providers. And the uptake of that has been minimal. And part of it is, and the US experience has shown that, secure messaging between patients and providers can lead to high volumes of messages that clog an inbox. And managing the EHR inbox has been a big challenge in the US and contributes to burnout. So for me, as I look at, as we try to roll this out in Ontario, I think probably secure messaging needs to be paired with an AI inbox manager. That if you can't filter your messages and tag them and maybe generate responses, no one will start using messaging because they're worried about the onslaught. So I think the ecosystem is really important in that the tools need to fit together to work. AI scribes, I mentioned previously, they can be expensive. They're, 70 Canadian dollars a month up to 400 Canadian dollars. And so doctors might be willing to pay on the low end, but on the higher end, maybe not. And hospitals have been unclear on that. We recently had a government agency buy 10,000 AI scribe licenses for 20% of the family doctors in the country, because they think it will create standardized data outputs that will improve interoperability. And as we link AI scribes to robotic process automation, hospitals may start to see value. So that's sort of the ecosystem question. Essentially, we need to think about combining multiple functions because otherwise you produce solutions that create, downstream effects that are problematic. Getting, diverse groups to use technology and to pick up, increase the reach of programs is a huge thing. And that digital health, I think, it has enormous theoretical potential, but it has been challenging thus far. And I think, working with the ministry on this, it's sort of the outreach to how do we source the right patients and how do we identify the people who are not naturally using these tools. So it's maybe an imperfect answer to your question, but I've said a little bit more about ecosystems than about equity and outreach. But I would say it's the beginning of solving that second problem.
That's okay. Thank you so much, O'Neill. And maybe building on that, and point it to you, Louis, there's a bit of a digital divide problem happening where maybe less represented patient populations in clinical trials also tend to be less digitally literate. And it's a bit of a problem in the sense that certain populations just are more comfortable in using digital technologies throughout their day, but that's not necessarily the case with other populations. They're just not ready to implement digital solutions into their day-to-day activities. And so I guess from a pharma perspective, and really all other stakeholders, how can we work together to kind of, or is there anything we could do to get over this digital divide and make these digital health technologies more available for these less represented patient populations?
Yeah, thanks for that question. So I think you're absolutely right. There is a very clear digital divide, which is present when you run clinical trials, particularly if you run large clinical trials across multiple geographies. I think addressing that digital divide, it requires collaboration between digital health companies, healthcare systems, academia, non-for-profits, and essentially many other stakeholders. The collaboration can sort of look in sort of potentially different ways. I'll say there are a small number of things that we need to aim to do together. First of all, I think we need to sort of enhance access to digital health infrastructure. That might be technology, that might be internet access, that might be data storage facilities, so that people do have access. And in clinical trials, typically what we do is we offer the technology to patients that do not have access to it. The second step is around education and literacy. So no matter whether some patients have access to technology, if they don't know how to use it, then they will not be successful in doing it, and they will not benefit from it. So that's a very clear sort of step that we need to do. The third one, we discussed it a little bit earlier, which is around patient friendliness and designing digital solutions which are inclusive. I think potentially some of you are aware of some of the typical medical devices that may work better in some skin colors than others. I think that's a very clear example. So we need to make sure that we adapt the solutions that we develop in terms of languages and in terms of cultures
and functionality.
Yeah. Because of course the pathway for clinical care is potentially different across different geographies.
Absolutely,
so
yeah.
absolutely need to be adapted. What else?
And maybe I'll just ask one more question as a follow-up. What about the attitude towards using digital health? Is there something we could do or not really? What do you think? Is that pharma's, and it's okay if you don't have an answer to it, but I'm just curious.
No, I think it's a good question. So for sure, there are things that we can do. But I think first of all, what we need to do is we need to learn about which segments or which populations react in different ways to technology. And I think the typical one is people tend to think that perhaps elderly people, they are less technology savvy and less willing to use technology in clinical trials, when in reality, in many cases, what we see is entirely the opposite. Is elderly population perhaps interacting with the technology better, maybe because there are a number of reasons, but that's the case. But my point being very clearly, we need to identify which ones are those sort of reactions, and then we can sort of work together to address them.
And to add one more point, which is really interesting, I think studies have shown as well, different patients in different therapeutic area groups tend to have different tendencies in terms of how well they follow and how compliant they are from a digital health technology perspective. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think I am, but from an oncology perspective, patients tend to actually be quite compliant in using digital health technologies and better than other therapeutic areas.
Yeah, absolutely. I think in general lines that's true, although of course oncology is a very, very broad area with multiple different types of patients. But that brings another interesting point, which is the need to provide flexibility to patients. Right? So it's not about pushing technology because we think it's better.
Right.
It's about giving patients the option of receiving care in the way that works best for them. I
Correct.
think
It's
that's the key.
substantive versus additive. right?
Correct.
Yeah, exactly. And then, Maz, one last question. Given the rapid innovation in digital health, how can health systems adapt and evolve their infrastructure for digital health technologies that are being developed? Or should the question be, how can you evolve with the infrastructure that's already present? I'll leave that up to you to decide.
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I think there's a couple of ways to think about that. I mean, there's a lot of conversation, particularly in the US, around this concept of care as research, right? So this idea that you're not separating a trial from what would happen normally. From a scientific perspective, it's complicated to make sure that, like I said earlier, answering the right questions. But there is this idea culturally, and it's going back to the last point of the cultural attitudes towards digital technologies. And I think that they're particularly, well, actually, I'd say globally, there is an expectation of interaction with digital technologies to behave a certain way. We expect it now to work, right? If there's a delay or you see that donut of despair and it's spinning, it's bad news. Clinical trials haven't caught up to that, right? They still feel very slow. From a technology perspective, it feels clunky. It's not a consumer grade experience yet, generally. And I think there's a kind of cultural perspective where we need to understand what that looks like and how that fits into everyday care. Now, one example is the number of doctors now, even though they're not validated, right, will ask for consumer grade, Apple Watch readings from some of their patients, right? Because it gives them an idea, gives them a trend, gives them
Baseline.
some sort of, a baseline, but just more information than they had previously. And so you kind of think, well, they're already engaging with that from a care perspective. So how can we make sure that what they're engaging with is actually more robust? It's easier to use. It's that unified experience that we were talking about earlier, that it's end to end, and that it fits into that ecosystem without feeling like it's something separate. So I think from my perspective, really the ideal state would be not thinking about clinical trials as being different, but just kind of falling into an activator part of a digital journey for someone when they become a patient.
Amazing. So in the interest of time, we'll move on to the next theme. And we will just focus on the future of digital health technology. If it's okay, I will ask the panelists to keep the answers to 3 minutes, just because I want to make sure we have enough time for questions afterwards. Granted, also, just to give an idea to everyone here, we really are barely scratching the surface. There's so much more to talk about. There's so many other challenges. We haven't even talked about the regulatory gap that already exists. There's just so much to talk about. So, but regardless, we've talked about a few of the challenges. I think it's time to be a little bit optimistic and think about the future. So where do you see from maybe from a technology perspective, where do you see the space headed in 5 years, and how do you think we're going to get there in 3 minutes or less?
So, going back to the work, I've been with Medable just under 4 years now, significant change, but we're driven by this vision of 1, 1, and 1, which is we want to be able to start a study in 1 day, enroll a study in 1 day, and complete it in 1 year, right? It's a lofty ambition, but in order to move the needle even a little bit, you need to have that lofty ambition. So where we are at the moment is, we have an evidence generation platform, which is kind of, end to end, providing a unified platform to allow for the collection of data. And I think, again, as I said, the idea is that it becomes part of a natural digital or consumer grade digital experience. I think for the future, absolutely where we're going is, if you think about the clinical trial process, currently 90% of clinical trial budgets are spent on human services and human resources, right? Human-driven work. So naturally, I think just the way that things are going and the kind of zeitgeist, I think, agentic automation is an obvious next step, certainly for some of those manual tasks. And then I think very quickly from that, we'll be able to move into insights and analytics. So allowing that automation to kind of get rid of the white space, if you like, and then move into what those insights would be.
Amazing.
I hope that was under 3 minutes.
That's okay. I think you've done a great job. O'Neill, from a healthcare practitioner perspective, where do you see the space is headed, and maybe from your own, because you are the end user from a selfish perspective, where do you think or you want the space to be in 5 years?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start with Buzz's point that healthcare is ultimately under-designed as a service right now. It's not a consumer-grade experience. But if we look at how things have happened across a range of industries, we spent about 60 years engineering physical activity out of our lives, and we've spent the last 10 years trying to engineer social interaction out of our lives. So I do wonder if we just extend those trends, if that's the right thing to do. So one example I think of is the Amish people. As a tech person, it's an interesting example where they say no to TV and cars because they go against the lifestyle that they want, which is people traveling together and people spending a lot of time talking to each other and visiting, right? But they say yes to fridges and washing machines because they've got large families, and it reduces sort of the chores and allows them to feed large numbers of people at a time. So there's an intentionality to how technologies is used in that particular religious community. But for us in a health system, so we could aspire to less. We could be more like airline customer service and use chatbots and monitoring tools with algorithmic feedback and extensive disintermediation. So there's like a rise of self-serve medicine, or we could aspire to more. We could say, how do we understand patients' goals? How do we track their function? How do we adjust treatments to enhance people's goals of care and improve self-actualization? Or do we do a bit of both based on the available resources? So I think we just need to think about how we want health systems to contribute to human health and well-being. And there is a potential now that's coming in the next 5 to 10 years that allows us to aspire to much more than we have before. How do we do that? I don't have a good answer, but I would say testing things out. We're building out this kind of living lab where we test a bunch of functions in a simulated environment with tools on the market and MVPs, and then we roll them out from a small place to a range of clinics. But we really understand, is this the medicine that we want to build? Is this the future that we want to create? And I think we need to sort of not let markets drive this, but rather individuals as users of healthcare and providers as people who want to advance the field to make those decisions.
Thanks, O'Neill. Pass it on to Louis. From a pharma perspective, where do you see the place is headed, or where do you want it to be, and how are we going to get there?
So my view is over the past few years, digital health has almost been the new and shiny toy that everyone wanted to play with. And that meant there has been a lot of investigation and research without necessarily all the time delivering a huge amount of value. And I think this is what is going to change in the future. I think as we move forward, we're going to laser focus in using only digital solutions that deliver value by addressing some of the key challenges that we have today in our clinical trials. By the way, I do think that this was a necessary step that we needed to take in order to learn about the real value and potential opportunities that we have in front of us. So moving into the future, if we think about what are the key challenges that we have today in our clinical trials, of course, every clinical trial is different. There are many more challenges that I have the time to describe in 3 minutes. Sure. We can talk about the fact that more than 90% of the data is collected in clinical sites, and that's highly burdensome for the patients, some of them who are very sick. patients' experience during the clinical trials often are very poor. Um, very small number of patients are willing to participate in clinical trials for a variety of reasons.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There is a lot of white space and time lost in the clinical development process, and all these things combined result in huge loss for the pharmaceutical sponsors and for the patients ultimately.
Absolutely.
So in the future, laser focus on solutions that critically address the challenges that we have.
And critical solutions that are clear in the value they provide to every stakeholder that's in the value chain of the clinical trial.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so with that, we will stop our questions and open the floor to the audience. Again, as I mentioned, we may or may not have some prizes for the best asked questions. So please fire away. I think there is a mic that we can pass along, or maybe not. Maximilian, is there a mic? Oh, okay. Okay.
Who's asking a question?
Okay, so question.
Turn it down, Max. I was going to throw it. I promise. Turn it down a lot, Max. Wake up, Kate. I'm just going to throw it. You just have to catch it.
Yeah, we turned off the screen for some reason.
We have. Are you sure?
Technical.
I don't want to injure anybody.
So.
Hello.
Go
Hi,
ahead.
this is Jesus. I work in Cleveland Clinic London in one hospital. Take yet another maybe expense to integrate within their EHRs another solution. How do you convince caregivers again to spend the time learning the usage of these new tools, and then maybe patients actually to follow up once they cure or they have completed that clinical trial that might have or might not have worked, which is a challenge to follow up once they have finished the treatment.
So can we please keep the question answers to 2 minutes this time, just so that we can have as many questions as we could. But who would, it's up to you, who wants to take on this question?
Yeah, I can kick it off.
Okay.
And I think it's similar to some of the conversation we had earlier. It's driven by the value, right? So, and understanding the customer. So from each of those stakeholders, what is the value that the solution brings? And then how do you measure that? What are the metrics, the outcomes? Understand what their baseline is today, right? And use that to demonstrate the efficiency of whichever solution is you're proposing. I think the EHR integration one is a great one, right? Because there isn't a single solution that works across the board, works globally, and you know, for many, particularly for site investigators, it's yet another system and yet another post-it note with a password that they have to remember. So making sure that you understand, we talked about the ecosystem, making sure that you understand the ecosystem that you're going into, and that you're really clearly able to demonstrate that value. If you're not, then you know you're going to fall at that first hurdle. And it's from my perspective, it's very much a change management process, right? You really need to understand who the stakeholders are, what's the problem that you're solving for, and make sure that you bring people along and get them on the bus, because there will always be naysayers, and you need to make sure that you're firm in that commitment with the value. That's from my perspective.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. I think it's very difficult, if not impossible, to convince anyone to add complexity if complexity and burden for the patients if they don't see the value that would generate for them. So, yeah.
And next question. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Okay, so thank you for the speech today. It was very nice. I would say that I would love to have a startup of one day. That would technically, it's like 6 months to 1 year on average, so would be very nice. I think you quickly tapped into the regulatory hurdle. So one of the issues that we see in pharma is that all of the digital innovation are really helping the patient, but then regulators doesn't always accept unless they are validated, and validation is really expensive, time-consuming, complicated. So I would like to understand how you see the conversation with regulators in a way that could simplify or help bring in the technology faster, hopefully, and in a more, let's say, easy way into the clinical trials and also in daily life.
You raise a very good question, and it's, you know, the regulatory landscape is still functioning the same way as if, you know, we're trying to approve medications rather than digital health technologies, and we don't seem to have a standardized way to approve digital health technologies. But I think maybe O'Neill wants to take on that question.
Sure. So I think, you know, if we separate out the functions, there's a wide range of tools that have kind of administrative functions that are low risk. And we're seeing those spread quite a bit. And there's less of a burden. When you move into the, you know, clinical decision support space, and I don't know the UK context as well. In Canada, we have, you know, regulated, you know, digital tools at some point become regulated devices when they guide clinical decision making. But, you know, remote monitoring, there's things that just transmit information. There's, you know, collecting patient-reported experience and outcome measures. There's a bunch of intermediate functions that I think we can make better use of that, from a regulatory perspective, are relatively easy to roll out. So anything that's administrative, anything that's just reporting, you know, straight up information. And then as we go into monitoring and then decision support, for sure, it's, it is challenging, and to some extent rightly so. But I do hope that over time we're going to make that the testing easier.
Amazing. Anything you guys want to add? We want to take on the next question. Oh, you're good. Okay. The rule is you have to throw it to the next person.
Okay. Sorry.
Right.
Got it. Thank you. This has been very, very interesting so far. I was very interested to hear, O'Neill, when you talked about the need to really integrate many different solutions within kind of one ecosystem in a way. And of course, in many other industries, platforms are, you know, the name of the game. And I wonder, you know, maybe first from your perspective, O'Neill, you know, what does this perfect, you know, combination solution look like? You know, what could that platform offer you, or is it a platform? You know, what is this combination solution that would be actually useful from a patient perspective or from a physician perspective as a user? And then my second question is, who should actually own it? You know, or should it be the government? Should it be a private company? Is it going to be pharma? Is, you know, and I would really be interested to hear from you, O'Neill, and then maybe from some of the industry colleagues as well.
Sure. So I would start with so the platform, like what we've had is electronic medical records that are walled gardens that don't provide APIs, that really impede interoperability. So that's kind of our history. And you get locked into really expensive contracts with vendors that are not platforms. And now it's changing. And, you know, so that's it, that, you know, we'll hopefully be moving towards platforms. But who should provide them is a great question. I mean, I think all the tools should be interoperable, and maybe the platform is provided, you know, by a third party whose business is not to prevent others from collaborating. But in terms of functions, so what I imagine is, you know, as a provider, I want to be able to manage triage incoming requests. I want to be able to do, you know, help with diagnosis and treatment, and particularly as a generalist, can I take on more so we don't have to refer as much to specialists, which are in short supply in Canada? Patient education and self-management is really underdeveloped as an element of our health system. And I think digital tools have a huge role to play. The monitoring I mentioned, I think, is a huge area for development, that the space, we make use of the space between visits to then make better clinical decisions. And there are all kinds, you know, in family medicine, most of our treatments have 10% effect sizes. If you don't track and monitor trends in symptoms, you don't even know if your drugs are working. And that's true in prostate, you know, benign prostatic hypertrophy, and a wide range of conditions. So that's the third piece. And then the last one would be care coordination. And then to pull back at a system level, if we can risk stratify and balance demand and supply at a system level through interfaces that are easy for patients to, you know, sort of elicit their needs, I think that's where we need to go, because all health systems are, you know, under strain, and we don't triage and prioritize efficiently.
Amazing. And any comments?
Can I maybe very quickly bring into the sort of the patient's perspective as well, which is critically important. I think when we run clinical trials, of course, there are multiple multiple assessments, multiple needs to collect data, multiple opportunities for the patients to communicate with their investigators. And patients do not want different solutions to do all those things, because then it will become very difficult and very complex for them to run the clinical trial. So one of the key advantages of that integration is to offer a seamless patient experience when they are part of a clinical trial, and of course in the future in the real world as well. So that seamless patient experience is critically important.
Awesome. Maybe there's more.
Nearly.
Okay, next applicant.
Thank you. I have two quick questions, and it depends how quickly you want to answer them. The first one, I was taken by your remark about using technology because we need it, not just because we can. As an everyday consumer, I don't know I need something until I try a technology, and the pace of movement in technology from the AI itself is moving at such a hell of a pace. And if I can, and it seems to work for me, suddenly I realize the penny drops, I need it. Right. So your balance, how do you balance that sort of priority? And the second piece, which you're welcome to answer or ignore, is the growth of blockchain as a methodology for all the trials and clinical, and obviously associated with that comes all the data management. And maybe a couple of quick remarks around each of those would be helpful, or later over drinks.
Yeah, I can certainly have a stab at answering the first question, which I think is a really interesting one. So we don't know we need something until perhaps sometimes we try it and we know it works. Having said that, I will also argue that is sometimes difficult to, in a clinical trial context, particularly, to try things without a hypothesis first. Okay. So you may not be certain that what you're trying is going to work, so that's perfectly fine, let's try it. My point being, I think we need a clear hypothesis that suggests there is a potential benefit in deploying these digital solutions. Okay. Then the benefit may or may not crystallize. That's part of the research, but that hypothesis needs to be there. Again, if the hypothesis is not there, then to the previous question, it's going to be really difficult to engage with the right stakeholders. Okay. Your second question around blockchain, I'm sort of tempted to pass it to somebody else. I'm not an expert.
Please don't look at me for that one. But I do want to raise the point around your first question. I think one of the challenges, particularly in the clinical trial space, is people in the industry suffer from the hype cycle, right? And there are times where there's a level of FOMO and people feel like they ought to be including a digital technology, and then it tries to get shoehorned in. And I think that was, one of the things Louise was alluding to, perhaps, was, this idea of just using a technology for the sake of it and hoping that it works is not the approach that we should be taking.
I think we have a question over here. Yep.
Hi, the word interoperable has been used several times. I wonder how important you think data standards are for sharing data and comparing it. And if it's important, what's the level of maturity of the existing data standards, or is that a big barrier at the moment?
Great question.
It is very important. I think, at least to start with, I think, as technology is improving, I was talking earlier about some of the agentic pieces and being able to decipher kind of unstandardized data and be able to understand what those insights are. I don't think we're there yet. I think, and again, from a trial perspective, there is a level of standardization, I think, that is robust. We have data management standards in the outputs that are prepared. We have standards in how adverse events are reported, etc. And so there is a level of standardization in the trial space. I think in the healthcare space, I don't know enough about it, but we'll let O'Neill kind of address that. But I think that's sometimes where the challenge is.
Yeah, thanks, Muzz. In Canada, we have a digital health interoperability task force, and we had a bill that was actually going to slated to go into Parliament until the government, now our government's prorogued, and it probably won't go. Basically, the bill is going to die. So we had an attempt to get to interoperability standards. I think the challenge is, if you just think of electronic health records that create a set of standards in a large hospital, that represents a tiny fraction of all the data in the hospital. There are so many things outside, like clinical data is a tiny piece of all the data that a hospital manages. And so Chief Information Officer said, even putting a whole province, and we've done that, we put whole provinces on the same electronic medical record, it is actually only addresses a tiny fraction of the problem. So data standards is a huge thing. I think the US has made more strides for sure than we have. And I think Europe is somewhere along the way, but it's not a tech problem. It's actually a governance and legislative problem.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think, so for everyone else who might have any questions, is there any? A couple more. We have a question over here. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, the panel, it was a really interesting discussion. You brought up practical implementation and accessibility, where the direction of innovation in clinical trials should also be focusing on the concept of less is more, and where you have no health, any health is good. So the focus here is on low-income countries in areas that accessibility is very difficult, where telemedicine and some of these innovative techniques you're using have great applicability. And I don't think there's enough research being done on the feasibility and practicality of certain innovative techniques used in low-income countries. And I speak as a physician with 40 years practice in ophthalmology, both in Canada, the States, and worldwide. And I see that on a day-to-day basis.
You're absolutely correct, and I'll let you answer this, but I just want to highlight one thing, which is there's a reason why the adoption of digital health technologies is very prevalent in places like North America, and maybe I think China as well is getting up there. But there's definitely, like you've highlighted, some serious access issues in less developed countries.
Yeah, the other big thing is behavioral modification. It's much easier actually to train people to use some of these innovative techniques when they've never trained or used it before. When people are accustomed to healthcare from a previous generation, they tend to be a little bit more resistant, sort of like what Dr. Anil was mentioning with the Amish. They're adopting some things, but not other things.
Right. And anybody want to take on the?
I'll have a quick stab at it, and I appreciate what you're saying. I completely agree that there needs to be more effort. Again, I'm speaking from a clinical trial perspective, and I think it's less actually about digital literacy. So if you look at places like Pakistan or in Kenya, mobile phone usage is way higher, right, than in the Western world. Particularly per person, the number of mobile phones that exist. The mobile banking systems in Kenya were way ahead of Western systems. So I don't think it's necessarily a question of digital literacy. From a clinical trial perspective, I think actually it's the infrastructure of the trial that is the challenge. So ensuring that there's robust governance, that there's robust regulatory review, that there are robust IRBs that are there to ensure patient safety and that trials are conducted to an ethical standard. And I think generally there's a mistrust that's developed over many years of pharma and what they're doing. So I think again it's kind of a multifaceted challenge. But again, we were talking earlier about the diversity piece. It's really interesting that much of the conversation around diversity in clinical trials focuses on improving diversity in one country, right? Rather than thinking globally.
Right.
And improving the diversity. You'll still be able to get that data. And I think that's an approach that more and more people are thinking about, but there's still a long way to go.
Awesome.
Thank
I
you.
think I'm just going to pause here and thank you all for joining. I hope you found value in this talk. I think it's important to highlight that, and I hope that you have an appreciation for how complex this space is, but also at the same time, the level of benefits that digital health technologies bring to patient care, but also the challenges that we have to deal with and have to be aware of and understand and navigate well to successfully bring PhDs to trials. So with that, I'd like to thank you all for joining us and thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great evening.
Oh, yes, books. So the two questions that I think were touched on. I think I get to choose. I put all this together. I think I think the data one was very good. So I'm gonna go with that one. And the regulatory was as well. Yeah, so we're gonna go with these two.
So if you come up, if you guys can sign the book.
Oh, wow.
That Eric is written. Guys, don't forget, if you haven't signed up for our mailing list, sign up to the mailing list. And every Thursday, we have a speaker here. And every Friday, the workshop series. And next week, we have a pitching event. And there are free drinks in the bar. Don't use this normally, yeah?